The smartest way to deal with toxic people is not to fight them, not to expose them, and not to try to change them. The smartest way is to understand one simple truth: toxic people thrive on reaction. They are powered by emotion. Your anger feeds them. Your explanations entertain them. Your need for closure gives them control. Once you understand this, everything changes. Toxic people are not always loud or obvious. Some are subtle, some appear charming, some disguise manipulation as concern, criticism as honesty, and control as love. Their real skill is not cruelty. Their real skill is pulling you into emotional chaos while staying emotionally detached themselves. That is their advantage, and the smartest move is to remove that advantage. You don't defeat toxic people by being louder or more aggressive. You defeat them by becoming unreachable emotionally. Calm is not weakness. Calm is control. When you stop reacting, they lose their grip. When you stop explaining yourself, they lose leverage. When you stop seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it, you reclaim your power. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that if they just say the right words, the toxic person will finally understand. They won't. Toxic people don't misunderstand you. They understand you perfectly. They just don't care. Your pain doesn't register as a signal to stop. It registers as confirmation that what they're doing works. So the smartest approach is not confrontation. It's clarity. You set boundaries without drama. You don't negotiate them. You don't justify them. You simply enforce them. Boundaries are not threats. They are standards, and standards don't need permission. You don't announce boundaries to toxic people, hoping they'll respect them. You observe behavior and you respond accordingly. Less access, less information, less emotional availability, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Silence, distance, and consistency do more than 1,000 arguments ever could. Another smart move is understanding that you are not responsible for fixing anyone. Toxic people often position themselves as victims, pulling you into guilt. They'll say you're cold, you've changed, you're selfish. That's not an observation, it's a tactic. When you stop tolerating disrespect, those benefiting from it will accuse you of being the problem. Let them. Their discomfort is not your emergency. You don't owe explanations to people who misuse them. You don't owe access to people who disrespect boundaries. And you certainly don't owe loyalty to those who repeatedly show you who they are. The smartest thing you can do is believe behavior, not words. Watch patterns. Anyone can apologize. Anyone can promise change. Toxic people are often excellent with words and terrible with consistency. The truth always lies in what happens next. If the behavior doesn't change, the apology was just a reset button, not accountability. Emotionally intelligent people don't chase closure from toxic individuals. Closure is something you give yourself when you accept reality. Waiting for a toxic person to validate your pain is like waiting for fire to apologize for burning you. It won't happen. Instead, you detach with dignity. You don't become cruel. You don't become bitter. You become precise. You choose where your energy goes. You understand that peace is more valuable than being right. One of the smartest tactics is neutrality, not coldness, not hostility, neutrality. You stop giving emotional reactions. You become predictable, calm, and uninteresting to someone who feeds on chaos. This isn't weakness, it's strategy. When there's nothing to provoke, nothing to manipulate, toxic behavior has nowhere to land. And if distancing yourself makes them escalate, that's confirmation, not confusion. When someone reacts aggressively to your boundaries, it proves they never respected you, they only enjoyed access to you. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is also knowing when to walk away completely. Some situations don't improve, some people don't change. Staying doesn't make you loyal, it makes you exhausted. Leaving doesn't make you heartless, it makes you aware. You don't need to burn bridges. You just stop crossing them. Remember this: healthy people don't punish you for needing space. Healthy people don't twist your words. Healthy people don't thrive on your self-doubt. If someone consistently brings confusion, anxiety, or tension into your life, that's data. Use it. The strongest people are not the ones who endure the most disrespect. They're the ones who recognize it early and remove themselves without drama. Strength is not how much you tolerate. Strength is what you refuse to accept. So the smartest way to deal with toxic people is simple but not easy. You stay calm, you stay observant, you protect your energy, you act, not argue, you move quietly, and you choose peace over proving a point. Because the moment you stop reacting is the moment you regain control, and control over yourself is the only power that truly matters. Toxic people feed on emotional reactions because emotion is leverage. The moment you react, they gain information, control, and momentum. Anger tells them where your limits are. Frustration tells them what hurts you. Defensiveness tells them you are still trying to be understood. Every emotional response becomes a tool they can use again. This is why arguments with toxic people feel endless. You're not having a disagreement, you're supplying fuel. The mistake most people make is assuming toxic behavior comes from confusion or poor communication. It doesn't. Toxic people understand exactly what they're doing. They test, they observe, and they adjust. If raising their voice works, they raise it again. If guilt works, they lean into guilt. If silence makes you chase them, they use silence as punishment. None of this is accidental. It's pattern-based behavior driven by reaction. Calm detachment interrupts that pattern, not passive silence, not emotional shutdown. Calm detachment means you are fully aware, fully present, but no longer emotionally accessible. You hear what is being said without absorbing it. You observe behavior without internalizing it. You respond when necessary, but you do not react. Reaction is impulsive and emotional. Response is deliberate and controlled. Toxic people depend on the first and are disarmed by the second. When you stop reacting, confusion sets in for them. The usual buttons no longer work. The sarcasm doesn't land. The provocation falls flat. The emotional hooks don't catch. This isn't because they suddenly respect you. It's because the system they rely on has stopped functioning. Calm detachment removes the reward. Many people fear detachment because they confuse it with weakness or avoidance. In reality, detachment requires discipline. It takes strength to remain calm when someone is trying to provoke you. It takes confidence to not defend yourself when you know the truth. It takes emotional maturity to let someone misunderstand you without rushing to correct them. Detachment is not disengagement from reality. It's disengagement from manipulation. Toxic people often escalate when reactions stop. They may increase criticism, exaggerate accusations, or shift into victim mode. This is not regression, it's exposure. When manipulation stops working, it becomes louder. The escalation is evidence that calm detachment is effective. It reveals how dependent they were on your emotional participation. Calm detachment also protects your clarity. Emotional reactions cloud judgment. When you're angry or hurt, you negotiate against yourself. You explain too much. You agree to things you don't want. You accept behavior you shouldn't. Detachment creates space. In that space, you can see patterns clearly. You stop focusing on isolated incidents and start recognizing cycles. You notice how apologies never match behavior. You notice how accountability is always redirected. You notice how peace only exists when you're the one compromising. Another reason calm detachment is powerful is because it shifts the power dynamic internally. Toxic people want you focused on their moods, their approval, their reactions. Detachment brings your attention back to yourself. You start monitoring your energy instead of their emotions. You ask different questions, not how do I fix this, but why am I tolerating this? And not how do I make them understand, but what does this cost me? This internal shift is dangerous to toxic people because it makes you less predictable. Predictability is how manipulation survives. When you always explain, they wait. When you always forgive, they repeat. When you always react, they provoke. Detachment breaks predictability. You stop over-communicating. You stop justifying your decisions. You stop giving immediate emotional access. That uncertainty removes their sense of control. Calm detachment also preserves your dignity. Arguments with toxic people often pull you into behavior that doesn't reflect who you are. You raise your voice. You say things you later regret. You compromise your values to be heard. Detachment keeps you aligned. You don't need to win the argument if you're no longer playing the game. You don't need validation from someone committed to misunderstanding you. This approach doesn't require confrontation or dramatic exits. It's subtle, it's behavioral, shorter responses, neutral tone, clear limits, no emotional explanations. You become consistent. Consistency is threatening to toxic people because it cannot be negotiated with emotions. You don't punish. You don't lecture. You simply remove yourself emotionally from anything that drains or disrespects you. Calm detachment also helps you see who benefits from your reactions. Some people stay close not because they value you, but because they value access to your emotional labor. Your reassurance, your patience, your forgiveness, when that labor stops, the relationship changes. Sometimes it improves, often it dissolves. Either outcome gives you information. It's important to understand that detachment is not about becoming cold or indifferent to everyone. It's selective. You don't detach from healthy relationships. You detach from patterns that harm you. You still feel, you still care. You just stop offering emotional access to people who misuse it. Over time, calm detachment rebuilds self-trust. You stop doubting your perceptions. You stop second-guessing your boundaries. You learn that peace doesn't come from resolving every conflict, but from refusing unnecessary ones. You realize that not every reaction deserves a response. Not every comment deserves an explanation. Not every person deserves continued access. The greatest advantage of calm detachment is that it returns control to where it belongs, not over others, but over yourself. Your emotions stop being weapons others can use. Your attention becomes intentional. Your energy becomes protected. And the absence of reaction becomes the loudest statement you can make. Boundaries are meaningless when they exist only as words. Toxic people don't respond to statements of intention. They respond to consequences. Explaining your limits, justifying them, or negotiating them gives the other person something to work with. Every explanation becomes an opening. Every justification becomes a weakness they can exploit. This is why boundaries fail when they are announced instead of enforced. A boundary is not a debate. The moment it turns into one, it stops being a boundary and becomes a request. Toxic people are skilled at turning requests into negotiations and negotiations into control. They ask questions not to understand, but to wear you down. They challenge your reasons. They minimize your feelings. They shift focus from their behavior to your tone. If you keep explaining, you stay trapped in the loop. Silent enforcement is different. It doesn't require permission. It doesn't require agreement. It doesn't even require understanding. It operates on behavior, not words. You observe what happens, you decide what you will tolerate, and you adjust your access accordingly. There is no announcement. There is no warning speech. The boundary shows up as a change in how available you are. Consistency is what gives boundaries their power. One-time enforcement teaches nothing. Inconsistency teaches toxic people that persistence works. If you enforce a boundary today but abandon it tomorrow because of guilt, pressure, or loneliness, you train the other person to wait you out. They learn that if they push long enough, you will fold. Consistency communicates something words never can. This is no longer negotiable. Toxic people often test boundaries the moment they sense one forming. They escalate behavior, not because they didn't hear you, but because they want to see if you mean it. This is where most people fail. They mistake the test for misunderstanding and start explaining again. The explanation becomes reassurance. The reassurance becomes permission. The boundary collapses. Enforcement without explanation removes that opportunity. When behavior crosses a line, you reduce engagement. You end conversations. You leave earlier. You stop sharing personal information. You stop responding immediately. These actions speak clearly. They require no emotional performance. They don't invite argument. They don't give the other person material to twist. Another reason silent enforcement works is because it keeps you grounded. Explaining boundaries often pulls you into emotional labor. You relive the hurt. You defend your needs. You manage the other person's reactions. You try to remain calm while they push back. Silent enforcement bypasses all of that. You don't need them to agree for the boundary to exist. You just need to act. Many people fear that enforcing boundaries without explanation is rude or unfair. This belief often comes from being conditioned to prioritize others' comfort over your own well-being. Toxic people exploit this conditioning. They rely on your discomfort with being seen as difficult or cold. They frame your boundaries as cruelty, so you'll abandon them. But fairness does not mean unlimited access. Respect does not require self-sacrifice. You can be polite and still be firm. You can be calm and still be unreachable. Silent enforcement is not punishment. It's alignment. You align your actions with your values instead of your emotions. Negotiated boundaries are fragile because they depend on the other person's cooperation. Enforced boundaries are stable because they depend only on your behavior. This distinction is critical. The more toxic the person, the less likely they are to respect a boundary that relies on empathy or understanding. They may even agree verbally and violate it later. This is why behavior must be the deciding factor. Toxic people often respond to boundaries with accusations. They say you've changed. They say you're distant. They say you're selfish. These statements are designed to trigger guilt and pull you back into explanation. If you engage, the cycle restarts. Silent enforcement means letting those accusations exist without defending yourself against them. You don't correct the narrative. You don't chase being understood. Consistency over time creates a new reality. The person either adjusts their behavior to maintain access or they remove themselves. Both outcomes protect you. What matters is not whether they like the boundary, but whether you maintain it. Boundaries are for your protection, not their approval. Silent enforcement also reveals intention. When someone respects a boundary only when it's explained repeatedly, they're not respecting the boundary, they're respecting your emotional effort. When someone adapts without complaint, it shows capacity. When someone reacts with anger or manipulation, it shows entitlement. Enforcement clarifies what words obscure. The strongest boundaries are boring. There is no emotional charge, no dramatic speech, no final warning, just repetition of the same response every time the line is crossed. Predictability on your side eliminates manipulation on theirs. They learn there is no payoff in pushing. Over time, enforcing boundaries without negotiation builds self-respect. You stop relying on others to validate your needs. You trust your judgment. You stop feeling guilty for protecting your time and energy. You realize that anyone who truly values you will adjust, not argue. Boundaries fail when they are emotional. They succeed when they are operational. When your behavior changes and stays changed, the message is delivered whether anyone agrees with it or not. Walking away with self-control is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Many people associate strength with confrontation, endurance, or proving a point. They believe that staying, fighting, or explaining demonstrates resilience. In reality, the ability to disengage without drama requires far more discipline than staying locked in a cycle that feeds the ego but drains the spirit. Weakness clings, strength releases. Toxic dynamics survive on emotional investment. The more you argue, the more you justify, the more you hope for change, the more entangled you become. Walking away is not an impulsive act. It is the final step after observation, reflection, and repeated evidence. It comes after you realize that effort is no longer producing growth, only exhaustion. Self-control is what separates walking away from running away. Running away is driven by fear, avoidance, or emotional overwhelm. Walking away is driven by clarity. You are not escaping discomfort. You are choosing alignment. You are not avoiding conflict. You are refusing dysfunction. Toxic people often frame your departure as weakness because it threatens their sense of control. They will say you couldn't handle it, you gave up, you were too sensitive. This narrative is strategic. If they can redefine your strength as failure, they can protect their own behavior from accountability. But their interpretation does not define reality. Real weakness is staying where you are consistently disrespected and calling it loyalty. Real weakness is sacrificing your peace to avoid being misunderstood. Real weakness is tolerating behavior that erodes your self-respect because leaving feels uncomfortable. Walking away with self-control means no announcements, no emotional speeches, no need to be understood. You don't burn bridges, you stop crossing them. You don't seek revenge, you remove access. You don't demand closure, you accept truth. This level of restraint is unsettling to people who rely on chaos. One of the hardest parts of walking away is resisting the urge to explain yourself one last time. There's a temptation to deliver a final message that perfectly captures your pain, hoping it will finally land. But clarity does not come from delivering the perfect explanation. It comes from recognizing that if someone wanted to understand you, they already would have. Silence is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is the most accurate response. Self-control also means allowing others to have their version of the story. This is difficult for people who value fairness and truth. You want to correct lies, defend your intentions, and protect your reputation. But toxic people don't spread narratives to understand you. They spread them to provoke you. Engaging only validates the game. When you walk away calmly, without hostility or justification, you take something powerful with you, your dignity. You leave without giving them the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. You leave without compromising your values. You leave knowing that your decision was not impulsive, but necessary. Walking away doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop paying for the privilege of caring. You recognize that empathy without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. Compassion without discernment becomes exhaustion. Self-control allows you to hold empathy without sacrificing yourself. There is also grief in walking away, even when it is the right choice. You grieve the potential, the hope, the version of the relationship you wanted it to be. Self-control allows you to feel that grief without letting it pull you back into what hurt you. You let the emotion pass without turning it into action. Toxic relationships often create an addiction to intensity. The highs feel meaningful because the lows are painful. Walking away feels empty at first because peace is quiet. But quiet is not absence, it is recovery. Self-control allows you to sit in that quiet long enough to heal. Another mark of strength is resisting the need to prove that you were right to leave. You don't collect evidence. You don't seek validation from others. You don't rehearse arguments in your mind. You trust your experience. You trust the pattern you observed. You trust yourself. People who lack self-control leave loudly. They insult, expose, retaliate, and explain endlessly. People with self-control leave cleanly. Their absence is the message. Their consistency is the boundary. Their calm is the confirmation. Walking away also requires accepting that not everyone will see your strength. Some will misunderstand it. Some will judge it. Some will only see it once they lose access to you. Strength does not require recognition to exist. Self-control means you don't return just because the other person promises change. You understand the difference between words spoken to regain access and behavior sustained over time. You don't re-enter the same dynamic hoping for a different outcome. You respect your own decision. This form of strength is quiet but permanent. It reshapes how you see yourself. Each time you choose peace over chaos, your standards rise. Each time you walk away without bitterness, your confidence deepens. You stop needing to prove resilience because you live it. Walking away with self-control is not weakness because it costs you something. It costs familiarity. It costs comfort. It costs the illusion of control over others. Weakness seeks comfort at any price. Strength accepts temporary discomfort for long-term peace. The most powerful moment in any toxic dynamic is when you realize you no longer need to participate. No argument, no explanation, no final stand. Just a decision made quietly and honored consistently.